Welcome back to Good Law, Bad Law. On today's episode, we're welcoming back Lawrence Douglas. Lawrence is a professor of law, jurisprudence, and social thought at Amherst College, and he's the author of the recent book, Will He Go? Trump and the Looming Election Meltdown. Lawrence and I revisit our earlier conversation, which was from before the election. Now we have all that we know that has gone on since November 3rd, and we have to take stock of it. How bad is it? How much is the chaos that we've seen with the Kraken lawsuits and lobbying of Republican legislatures, millions and millions of Americans who continue to accept and perpetuate some really pretty kooky conspiracy theories, but not easily written off. And I think that's the point that we get to in the conversation. What do we make of this? Not so much about Trump himself going forward, but where we are in this country socially and politically. What's going to happen? How crazy is it to make comparisons to 1930s Germany at this point? Certainly to 1950s in this country, times when we've really found ourselves in almost alternate reality, two realities, the real reality and then an alternate reality as to basic facts and truth. And what does that mean going forward in future elections in this country? So a sobering, but I think very thoughtful conversation, one I hope you enjoy as we round the corner into the new year 2020. Stay tuned for this episode of Good Law, Bad Law. So I want to welcome back to the podcast Lawrence Douglas, a professor of law, jurisprudence, and social thought at Amherst College, and the author of the book, Will He Go? Trump and the Looming Election Meltdown in 2020, as well as many other books. Professor Douglas, Lawrence, thank you so much for being back on Good Law, Bad Law.
Oh, great to be back with you, Aaron.
So I've really been looking forward to this as something of a bright spot, just to be able to talk with you in the midst of the still ongoing chaos after the November 3rd election. We did chat before the vote and all of the different scenarios that you foresaw that could really create tremendous post-election chaos. And I don't know anybody who could see it any other way. Is exactly what has happened. As you've looked at what has gone on, the dozens of election challenge lawsuits, the lobbying of Republican state legislatures to overturn the vote, and just the Kraken, all this craziness, what do you make of it now that we're almost to the end? We're almost to the final certifying by the vice president of the election results. What do you make of what you've seen over these last few weeks?
Well, I guess maybe I'd make 2 points, Aaron. The first is that, I think everything that we've seen has really driven home the way in which, Trump really has these profoundly anti-democratic and authoritarian tendencies. I mean,
Right.
He's really engaged in a very transparent attack on some of the most basic processes of a constitutional democracy. I mean, the kind of attacks that he's engaging in, we're used to maybe seeing them in a country like Belarus or something like that. We're really not. There's really no precedent for seeing this kind of thing in the United States. And we've seen that he's doing this in kind of relentless fashion. He's absolutely not backing off from it. I mean, if you look at his tweets from yesterday or today,
Mm-hmm.
he continues to be riding this baseless conspiracy theory that the election was rigged. The other thing, actually, to point out, I think, is that we were quite fortunate that the election ran really quite smoothly. Um, Obviously, it was conducted under extremely difficult circumstances, as we knew would be the case. Um, because of the tens of millions of mail-in ballots, it wasn't possible to really declare a winner until some days after the election. But the election itself actually ran relatively smoothly. Some of the things that really, really could have led to a total meltdown of the processes, such as let's say targeted hacks of some of the electoral machinery in swing states, or examples of genuine fraud that might have cast doubt on the outcome in some of the swing states, or really, really tight margins in the swing states. I mean, obviously we saw some tight margins, but not on the order of what we saw, let's say, in the year 2000 in Bush v. Gore, when 537 votes separated Bush from Al Gore. So, all said and done, we had a, remarkably smooth and well-run election. But even given that, we've seen the way in which Trump is able to attack the integrity of that election. And, I just think we're kind of awfully lucky, because if the election had not run relatively smoothly, the kinds of attacks that he's engaging on our democratic system could be, could be really potentially quite fatal.
Well, the other thing that's been so interesting about what we've seen is, despite the hyper partisan nature of our politics, and some of the most doomsday type scenarios that you looked at, looking at, say, a state like Pennsylvania or Wisconsin with a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor, trying to imagine a Republican legislature breaking with the popular vote in the state and certifying the state for Trump anyway. There's all kinds of ways things could have gone very differently. Imagining how things could play out, because we've become so accustomed to talking about this hyper partisan state of our politics, and yet in Georgia and Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, they may have. It seems like they humored the president and some of the more fringy people supporting him in these challenges, like Giuliani, but they held strong. They held for the rule of law, the rule of the vote, the rule of the way our elections are supposed to go in the end.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Though, I think they were certainly helped by that. I mean, if you look at a state like Pennsylvania, I mean, the margin of victory ultimately for Biden, it wasn't a trivial amount of votes. I mean, we're talking about what was like 140,000 votes, I think, in maybe I have that number anyway. But the number, it wasn't a trivial number at the end of the day. But I think you're also right to point out that some of these Republican lawmakers on the state level were ultimately more dedicated to the democratic process than we see on Republican lawmakers on the national level, the congressional level. Yeah. And the other thing also to point out is, something I think is, particularly sad in all these allegations that Trump has launched against the integrity of the electoral system is, the really kind of the heroic work of the election officials in the states who were, burdened with the task of tallying the ballots. They had to do it under conditions of social distancing with tremendous amount of of pressure on them, and many of them were Republican election officials as well, and they really did a terrific and I think it's fair to say even kind of heroic job. And they were really willing to defend the integrity of the system in ways that the President of the United States was not willing to do. And the idea that these people have received things like death threats, I mean, that's scandalous, disgusting.
Right. Well, so I guess here's the first question, the next part of where I think we have to take this. You've said it. I mean, I've been feeling it every day. You hear it on the news over and over again. The tweets, the lawsuits, the allegations, the conspiracy theories. We say this is undermining democracy. This is undermining our most fundamental values and principles as a country. Zooming out from the details of what's been going on, do you think this has been damaging to our democracy? Do you think perhaps that this is just a bad storm, a bad smelly, malodorous storm, and it's going to pass? Or do you think this has lasting damage? And if so, how do we get at what that damage is?
Yeah, I mean, it's of course a little bit hard to prognosticate, but I do think that there is a real damage there. Yeah, especially when you see the way in which these conspiracy theories have gained traction among Republican voters.
Yeah.
I mean, if 70% of Republican voters believe that our electoral system is unreliable. I mean, it's more than just unreliable. I mean, remember the story is not just that, somehow the system produced an unreliable result. It was that, basically there was a treasonous effort on the part of Democrats to rig the election, and that was successful. And you have, huge swaths of Republican voters buying into that. And if people don't believe in the integrity of the electoral system, that really does seem to be kind of recipe for a pretty radical repudiation of the system itself. So I do think that's very worrisome. I also, just kind of more direct level, I also worry about the way in which Republicans will try to bootstrap these baseless allegations into further efforts of voter suppression. I mean, we know that voter suppression has, emerged something of a staple of Republican politics over decades now. And I think that what we will see is continued efforts on the part of Republican lawmakers in this kind of, very cynical effort to say, well, we're simply trying to bolster the perceived integrity of our electoral system, that they will use that bogus claim to then kind of introduce laws that would limit the use of mail-in ballots, that would, kind of try to all the sort of efforts that we've seen in the past of having,
Right.
Stricter voter ID laws, that kind of thing.
Well, there was a lawsuit in Georgia right now. I believe the federal judge who ruled on this is Stacey Abrams' sister, overturning Georgia's attempt to purge thousands of voters
Exactly.
just before this runoff election, not in some quiet time in the state, but literally days before the vote, and that purging thousands of voters from the rolls, and that was overturned. We'll see what happens with that. But yeah, this is. I think that if the Democrats had been able to pull off a bigger win in the Senate, had picked up a majority, so that we weren't, scratching and clawing for these two seats in Georgia, we'll know in a few days the result. But if the Democrats had pulled off, more victories to gain control of the Senate, I think that would have been among the most important first Biden term legislative initiatives, which is all kinds of measures to widen access to the vote and restore election integrity and make sure that more people can vote and fewer people are intimidated and suppressed in their votes. And now, I don't know. We don't know what's going to happen.
Right, exactly. and I think it is fair to say that both kind of we can talk on the federal level and then also on the state level, but I do think that it's certainly the case that Republicans are not going to back off on their efforts to use the erosion of faith in the electoral system among certainly Republican voters as a pretext for trying to engage in further laws, legislative efforts to restrict voting, to suppress the vote.
Well, so on that, Lawrence, I mean, what it seems so odd what's going on now, and again, we've been talking about this really important Georgia runoff that takes place just in a few days. But here you have Trump still tweeting as recently as this morning. We're talking on December 30th, a couple of days before this episode will post. Today he's tweeting about the imagined brother of the Secretary of State in Georgia, Raffensperger. He doesn't have a brother, but they found a guy whose last name is the same, and he works for a Chinese telecommunications company. And they're spinning another conspiracy theory about that. It seems like that is the kind of thing, attacking Republicans, Trump attacking, state Republican governors, raising these conspiracy theories about the uncertainty of the vote and voting. It seems like all that would actually undermine confidence on the part of Republican voters and only motivate Democrat voters who see this as just conspiracy weaving craziness.
Yes. No, that's. I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, maybe that would be the kind of the wonderful takeaway from all this. If for some reason all these conspiracy theories end up leading to Democratic victories in the state of Georgia. I mean, obviously, that's one of the things that Republicans are very, very worried about.
Yeah.
They're certainly very worried about, what the fallout is from all these different allegations, and that, Trump has been, virulently attacking, as you pointed out, the governor of Georgia, Secretary of State of Georgia. I mean, all these people are in his sight lines, and I guess that's also one of the people who have, engaged in widespread speculation that many of the Republican lawmakers have been unwilling to repudiate Trump's, conspiracy theories about the election because they don't want to do anything right now to alienate the base, because they need the base to turn out in numbers in Georgia on January 5th. But yeah, we'll see. It would be kind of like a very pleasant and ironic outcome if all of Trump's rantings had the inadvertent result of or unintended result of leading to Democratic victories there.
So, all right. So we don't know yet, of course, what's going to happen, and that will be fascinating to see and try to dissect once we know the results. But the new president's going to have his hands full on so many fronts. I mean, just dealing with the rollout of the COVID vaccine and everything involved in that, which this president has completely abdicated responsibility for. That's going to be enough of a challenge. But then you have the politics, and I'm wondering what you make of. I mean, Joe Biden got a historic number of votes to beat Trump, but Trump also got a historic number of votes. I mean, there are 74 some million people who voted for Trump, and I think you alluded to this. There's still a fairly high percentage of Republicans anyway, and a much smaller but curiously significant number of independent voters who say they want Trump to run again. So what? And I look, I of course see these stories and just, you just shake your head and you think, why are people believing this? Why are they buying into this? But they are, or at least they seem to be. So I guess that's one question. Do you think 74 million people really do believe the election was stolen, as we hear on Twitter and TikTok and Instagram and the news, or is this just part of something else socially that's going on in our country right now? Almost like, people who, and this is not an original thought, but people who cheer for their team, even when their team stinks and hasn't won a game all season, they're still rabidly cheering for their team.
Yes, like my support of the New York Giants, for example.
Right.
Right. Exactly. So, I think it's probably fair to say that 74 million Americans don't necessarily buy into the story, but let's say we take 70% of 74 million, that's still that's a lot of Americans. And, I suppose one of the things is this terrible way in which the very either cynicism or cowardice of Republican lawmakers ends up helping to Trump to bootstrap these falsehoods into their own, into a system of belief.
Right.
If it's one thing, if one person comes out with ludicrous and baseless claims, and those claims are then, soundly repudiated by everyone else within the leadership of let's say, the party. And it's another thing if someone comes out with these ludicrous and baseless and defamatory claims, and then suddenly everyone is either strangely silent or, expressing support of them. And we've just seen so much support. I mean, even, when on January 6th, when Congress meets in this joint session to officially declare Biden the victor, we have reason to believe that there are going to be lawmakers in Congress who are going to challenge the Electoral College vote. Now, they're not going to succeed,
Right.
but the mere fact that they're engaging in these challenges, again, it has this bootstrapping effect of, of giving some kind of substance to what really should be soundly repudiated claims.
Yes, I think that's the lasting damage and the challenge we face is we've allowed, or Republicans in Congress, as you say, have allowed. President has created, the media has allowed the normalization of this, as if there really is some other side to the story. And I've seen this, thankfully, not that many times in my practice, where I go up against I'm in a case and I go up against the lawyer and I think, how is that lawyer able to say something I know is demonstrably not true? How are they able to cite a case in a brief that I know doesn't say what they're claiming it says? How does the lawyer do that? How do they sleep at night knowing that, as they must know, that what they're saying is untrue, or at least really grossly misleading? But thankfully, in a case, in a lawsuit, there's a judge. And, you put your trust in the system, that you put the facts there, you make your best arguments, and a judge is going to recognize as you do. So we have that in the legal system. It doesn't always work. It doesn't always, not saying it always reaches the right result, but we do have a system, a process that has rules and ways that we can get at least closer to the truth. But it seems like in politics and in elections, that's the real chaos. That's the meltdown, I think, is we don't have any way of really getting to any agreement on truth, to where we can then have policy disagreements over what to do about a particular problem. It's like universe and alternate universe right now. And I don't know what you do with that.
Right. No, I think that's absolutely right. And you might say that in a democracy there are these mechanisms that or these are institutions that are supposed to perform some kind of truth testing function. And you might say that they're the free press, and you could also say there are legal institutions. And we've seen that we've seen Trump's lawyers bring dozens and dozens of lawsuits. They've all been, dismissed, and often, dismissed with, expressions of incredulity and contempt that, they would even waste the court's time with these, frivolous suits.
Right.
And yet, that itself doesn't seem to affect the public's perception, or at least the supporters, the people, the Republican voters who buy into Trump's narrative. It's not as if they kind of stand back and go, yes, why is it that the courts are rejecting it? And then when it comes to, the press, obviously we now have this incredibly siloed media environment, such that the institutions or the media organizations that in a different generation had basically curated news and basically informed the American public as to, this is a reliable claim, this is not a truthful claim, they no longer have the power to do so. And, Trump's been very, very effective in, disparaging the most reliable news organizations as the purveyors of fake news. He really has been a genius at poisoning the well of democratic discourse, of not so much. And I think this is something that the great social thinker of the last century, Hannah Arendt, she wrote this whole thing about politics and lies, and I think one of the things she said is that politicians who engage in constant lying, it's not so much that they actually make people believe what they're telling them, but they basically have created a situation in which people just don't know what's up or down. And so if they like the politician, they'll just kind of trust what they're saying without necessarily, and it goes to the point that you were making, do people really believe in that kind of, deeper sense in what Trump is saying, or is there just kind of this fidelity to him, and just a unwillingness to, or a willingness to doubt the claims coming from the other side?
Well, look, you and I have both written about the Holocaust in Nazi Germany, and other parts of our careers, and so I know that's what you're alluding to here. And I was so resistant to that in 2015, 2016, because I think that I think the Holocaust and what happened in the 1930s and 40s in Europe is it's just too easy to compare. Anytime we're unhappy with someone, we say, "Oh, they're Nazi." But we really, I think we're there. I've become much less shy about making those comparisons. And you started the conversation making that reference that we've seen much more clearly the shades of authoritarianism, I'd say even fascism, in the way Trump has behaved and spoken. Do you think it's too much to make those comparisons? I mean, obviously, Trump is about to get shown the door in just a few weeks. And the election system in our country, you can say, despite enormous assaults, worked, and it has withstood, at least for the time being, these assaults. But I mean, I'm still very concerned about the future and the tens of millions of people that are becoming even more siloed, and the Twitter starts imposing checks on what gets said, and so everybody starts running to a new site, Parler or whatever.
Right.
There are too many ways that people can go to where they want to be, listen to what they want to listen to, believe what they want to believe, and very few people on the Republican side in Congress are actually standing up and saying, "Don't go there." I mean, there's no John McCain telling somebody, "No, don't go there," at this time. So, is it too? Should we really not worry, or are you feeling concerned about where we go from here because of where things are socially and politically, despite the fact that the election system actually did hold up in the end this time.
Yeah, I think my reaction is very similar to yours, Aaron. That, on one level we can say, look, it did hold up. We have a pretty durable history of constitutional democracy in this country, and we have demonstrated that it's hard for even an immensely on some level. I have to say that I do think he is a charismatic leader on some level.
Yeah.
It's hard for someone like that to really kind of successfully undermine a system with the kind of long history that we have. And like you, I usually try to resist what I tell my students is the reductio ad Nazium.
Yeah.
That everything leads to the Third Reich.
Right.
But at the same time, I think like you, I share the fear that the moment of Trump has not passed, and even if maybe who's to say whether he will run in 2024? I think he obviously will continue to desire the spotlight. He craves attention to the extent that he's able to continue to mobilize his base. He will continue to be the most relevant person in Republican politics. And even if he doesn't run in 2024, if he threatens to do so, he'll, in a sense, I think, freeze the field, and we'll see whether anyone like a Marco Rubio would have the temerity to try to challenge him. But I also fear that this whole narrative of the stolen election of 2020 will create the kind of myth that we saw in Germany of the Germany's defeat in the First World War being the result of a stab in the back on the part of Jewish politicians and and military leaders. I mean, so I do worry about that. I really do worry that he's creating this potent myth that will continue to be exploited, and that will continue to have a kind of to spread its sort of toxic waste around the body politic of this country.
Yeah, because even if it's not Trump, it could be one of his children. It could be Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio,
absolutely,
like you said, or Nikki Haley or another of these people waiting in the wings, or Pence himself. So are they suddenly going to say, yeah, all that stuff about this, come on, we know that? No, they're gonna have to exploit it. That's their base. That's where they're going to get their votes, and that's where they're going to throw for 20 yards and a first down, and get a cheer from that crowd. Whatever it is, they're not suddenly going to completely change this. They can't. They're locked in.
Exactly. That's the key point, Aaron. I think they're locked in.
Yeah.
They would have no chance of prevailing in a Republican primaries if they don't buy into that story. If they try to, in a sense, educate the voters and say, listen, people, I know you like Trump a lot. You voted him for a couple of times, but I hate to tell you this. Our electoral system actually has a lot more integrity than the president. The president was kind of like a sore loser, and he was kind of autocratic tendencies. They can't afford to do that.
Right.
Because if they do that, then they'll just be pilloried by the person who wraps themselves in the mantle of Trump. And so you're exactly right. They cannot afford to do that. And that then means that they have to basically run on lies, and on toxic lies as well. And then they have to create this narrative of we're trying to restore America, we're trying to protect Americans against those radical Democrats who stole our last election and are continuing to try to undermine our democracy. And that is not a recipe for a healthy nation.
Well, do you want to say something hopeful, Lawrence, before we wrap up?
Yeah, I know. We have our
It is
little.
a new year.
We have our little. Exactly. That's right. Okay, well, I think on a very general level, well, on a more specific level, I think we can say that come January 6th, Biden will be recognized by Congress. So whatever efforts some congressional lawmakers may engage in to try to continue to cast doubts on that result, they will issue in failure. And certainly it is a good thing to have a president who is dedicated to the project of trying to unite us and appeal to our better selves than a president whose politics are based on division and tear down. So, whether Biden can be entirely successful, certainly it's fantastic to have someone who is at least dedicated to that project. So let's all wish him well and hope that he can restore, a reasonable amount of health to our democratic system.
I'm going to wish Joe Biden good health as well.
Yes.
That he has a happy and a healthy new year, and that you do as well, Lawrence. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure talking with you and getting to think deeply about some of this. And I hope you and your family have a safe and very happy New Year. Thank you.
And likewise, same to you, Aaron, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.